The measurements from your schematic that you're going to need to calculate your neckline are J, which is the depth of the yoke. You'll also be using this next week to shape your yoke. And K, the width of the back neck. And furthermore, you might want to look at your sweater and take this measurement as well, which is the depth of the neckline from the back neck to the lowest point. First, you're going to take your measurement J, in my case this is 9 inches, and multiply that by your row gauge, in my case 6.875. This will tell you how many rows you have to work with as you shape the yoke of your sweater. I'm at about 62 rows. So this is the deepest that my neckline can be, which is 9 inches. And that's actually a pretty plunging neckline at 9 inches. So I'm gonna do mine a little bit short, a lot shorter than that. But if you do want a big wide neck, then you might want to start the shaping in the very first round after joining your body and sleeves, which we'll be talking about more next week. The other number that you want is K, which is the width of the back neck of the sweater. In my case, this is 6.25 inches, and I'm going to multiply that by my stitch gauge, which is 4.75. And that gives me just about 30 stitches. I find graph paper to be really helpful when I'm planning neckline decreases. You might not want to do a precise 1 square per stitch measurement because, as you can see, you are going to end up using a lot of squares that way. But for me, it's very helpful to visualize how the neckline is going to shape. So the way the square neckline works, we're going to start with this one because it is really the simplest, is you will knit up to the point that you want the neckline to start. So it's going to be fewer than 62 or whatever number you get for J times R rows. When you get to the row where you want the neckline to begin, you're going to bind off this number of stitches. Okay. And then the piece will be worked flat as you continue to knit up to the shoulders, and the back neck stitches will be bound off on the last row. And you have a square neck. If you want to trim around the neck like a ribbing, then you're going to want to remember to leave about 1 inch of room for that. Otherwise, the neck will end up higher than you expected it to be. In order to get a scoop neck, and also in order to get a crew neck, you're going to, again, knit up to the point where you want the neckline to start. So if I'm doing a crew neck sweater, I'm actually doing a turtleneck, and the crew neck is what I'm going to base that off of. I'll knit up to the point where I want it to stop and bind off about 2/3 of K. So in my case, if my entire back neck width is 30 stitches, I'm going to bind off 20. Then on every other row after that, you're going to decrease a stitch. And I'll show you this on the graph paper. It looks a little bit choppy, but you'll do that 5 times or until you have reached this number of stitches missing, and then knit straight up to the back of the sweater. So you'll get a neckline that looks kind of like this, but on your knitting it'll be a lot smoother and more curved. The real difference between the crew neck and the scoop neck is the depth. The crew neck comes right up to the collarbone, whereas a scoop neck can come down a lot further. And again, if you're adding ribbing, you want to make sure to leave at least an inch of room to compensate for that. Finally, the V-neck, which is also extremely easy. You will knit until you reach the point where you want the neckline to start, or an inch less if you are adding ribbing afterwards. And then you will identify the center point. So if this is the front of your piece, you identify the center point. If you have an odd number of stitches, then you identify the center stitch and bind it off so that you have a gap right here. And it might help to place markers. Then on every row, you're going to decrease 1 stitch on each side. Or you can calculate a different rate of decrease. Actually, I meant every right side row, so every other row of the piece. If you want a V that slopes less extremely, then you can decrease every 4th row and get a really narrow one. If you want a V that's much wider, you can decrease every row and you'll get a much wider one. But you'll do this until you have decreased away K stitches, so in my case that would be 30, and then knit straight up until you finish shaping the yoke of your sweater. I would like you to take this information and plan out the neckline that you think you're going to want to knit. The next step of working on your sweater involves doing neckline shaping and shoulder shaping at the same time. So while we all get caught up with knitting and planning out our necklines, we'll be ready to start the very last step of our sweater next week. And after that, we'll talk about finishing and embellishments. I am Nina, and this is Design Your First Sweater.